When we think of Andy Warhol, we think of the Campbell's soup cans, the vibrant portraits, the silver walls of his famous studio, the factory. But behind all that iconic imagery, there's a story that's, well, it's a lot darker. It's not just about pop art and wild parties. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the myth and figure out what it really cost to become one of Warhol's superstars.
And this quote, this is the key to understanding the whole thing. Warhol got something that a lot of people missed back then. The art world was a social game before it was an aesthetic one. His real genius wasn't just in the paint on a canvas. It was making himself, his presence, the main event.
And oh, he was a master at playing that game. Just picture this. It's January 1966. You're at the Delmonica Hotel in New York. There's this super formal, kind of stuffy dinner for a bunch of psychiatrists. And right into the middle of it all, Warhol unleashes his latest creation.
This one moment, this one night, it tells you everything you need to know about how the factory really worked. So, let's dive into part one, a calculated provocation. Okay, so the woman in the leotard, that was Edie Sedgwick. And for Warhol, she was basically his instrument. He sends her in to completely disrupt this formal dinner, and while all this chaos is unfolding, what's he doing? He's just standing off to the side, calmly filming the whole thing. The psychiatrists there, they're completely baffled. They're whispering, is this art? Is this a public breakdown? And for Warhol, that confusion was the art. He manufactured the spectacle, but he was always just far enough away to look like he was just observing.
That whole scene at the hotel, that was just a little peek into a much bigger, much more complicated system. So now, let's step inside the silver factory itself.
The factory wasn't just a place, you gotta understand. It was a concept. Yeah, it was an art studio and a film set, but it was also like a royal court, and Warhol was the king. This was the place where he could just point at someone and decide, you're a superstar. He completely blurred the line between creating art and just being art.
And the atmosphere he created there was incredible. The walls were literally covered in silver foil. You felt like you'd walked into another dimension, inside a piece of art. Cameras were always rolling, documenting everything. The doors were open to anybody, aristocrats, hustlers, poets, you name it. And the whole scene was fueled by amphetamines, which, and this is a key detail, Warhol would hand out but almost never took himself. He was the sober ringmaster of his own circus, always watching, always in control.
But a machine like this, it needs fuel. And I'm not talking about paint or film. I'm talking about people. And that brings us to the factory's perfect raw material.
The most famous superstar of them all, of course, was Edie Sedgwick. And to really get what happened to her, you have to look at her family. The Sedgwicks were basically American royalty, a 300-year-old dynasty. But underneath all that money and prestige was this really dark history of mental illness, all centered around her father, Fuzzy, a man whose doctors literally told him he should never have children.
So you've got this perfect storm of factors that made Edie the ideal subject for Warhol's project. She came from a deeply abusive home, had already been institutionalized for a breakdown, but she also had this incredible social power because of her family name. She was structurally vulnerable, just desperate to be seen, and yet she could open any door in New York City. Warhol had a kind of genius for finding people who were exactly this combination of broken and beautiful.
And one more thing, she came with cash. When she turned 21 back in 1964, she got a trust fund worth $80,000. Now that might not sound like a crazy amount, but in today's money, that's over $750,000. And that money was about to finance her very short, very bright burn in the spotlight.
So you take her deep psychological need, her high social status, and her rapidly dwindling bank account, and you have the three pillars of the factory's business model, which brings us to its extractive logic.
So let's break down the superstar deal. I mean, it was unbelievably one-sided. Edie gave everything. Her image, her time, her social connections, all of her labor for his films, and her entire trust fund. And in exchange, what did she get? Publicity, exposure. That was it. No salary, no royalties, no contract, just fame.
Now, to really understand how wild this deal was, you have to look at how Warhol ran the other side of his business. When he was working with, say, a wealthy socialite, it was a totally different ballgame. By the 70s, he was charging them $25,000 for a single portrait. That was a huge amount of money back then.
See the difference? The portrait commission was a clean, honest business deal. You give me money, I give you art. Simple. But superstardom, that was positioned as a gift of fame, of attention from the great Andy Warhol.
The problem was, it was a gift that used people like Edie as its raw material, and in the end, it cost them everything they had.
So, why did some people get chewed up and spit out by the factory, while others managed to walk away more or less okay? Well, it really comes down to the difference between the survivors and the casualties.
This slide really lays it all out. On one side, you have the casualty, Edie Sedgwick. She needed the factory for her sense of self, her identity. She was financially dependent on it and had no real support system outside of it. On the other side, you have a survivor like Baby Jane Holzer. She was already financially stable, she had a husband, a family, she had a whole life to go back to. For her, the factory was fun, until it wasn't, and when it stopped being fun, she just left. The key to survival was that simple, having somewhere else to go. An experiment this intense, this chaotic, it just couldn't last forever. The open-door era of the silver factory was speeding toward a wall. The final bill was coming due. In the end, it was sudden and it was violent. On June 3, 1968, a writer named Valerie Solanas walked into the factory and shot Andy Warhol. The attack nearly killed him, it shattered him both physically and psychologically. And just like that, the open-door party was over. The social experiment was done. From then on, the factory was just a business. But the human cost of that first era, it just kept piling up, long after the doors were locked. This timeline, it's just tragic. Freddie Herco, dead at 28. Then, in 1971, Edie Sedgwick, an overdose, also at 28. A year later, Andrea Feldman, gone at 22. Then, Candy Darling at 29. It's just this devastating pattern. You know, when Freddie Herco died, Warhol's very first reaction was regret that he wasn't there to film it. It's a chilling insight, right? It shows a mind that had started to see everything, life and death, as just more potential content.
So what about the man at the center of it all? The architect of this entire world? Well, when Andy Warhol died in 1987, he left behind an estate valued at over $220 million.
And that stark contrast between the immense fortune the creator built and the tragic fate of so many of his creations, it leaves us with one final big question. When you look at the art, which is brilliant, and the fame, which is still with us today, and then you look at the human wreckage it left behind, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is the true price of an iconic image?